This is the Crappie Connection, brought to you by Redneck RUBBER, Power Crappie, Visit Ridgeland, B&M Poles, K9 Fishing, Cornfield Fishing Gear, Bobby Garland Baits, Genco Fishing, Denali Rods, The Direction TV, Top Hat Jigs, Crappie Magnet, Anderson Minnow Farm,
HOOKBULLET Purpose-Built Optics.
About a mile from the Big Muddy River, place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away from being out in the sun all day. No matter where in the world I go, I'll always find home on the banks of that oxbow.
What's up, guys? Brad Chappell back with the Crappie Connection at the Crappie Expo 2022. That's kind of a tongue tire, isn't it, Ty?
A little bit.
I know he's waiting for you to see if I screwed that up, but
Oh, yeah.
got tied at the end. And go ahead and introduce yourself, Big Sasquatch.
Wesley Miller, owner of Big Sasquatch Outdoors, crappie guide service in Northwest Louisiana. Crappie guide service in Northwest Louisiana.
I know he does a lot of fishing in that area, and the subject line we're going to kind of kick off, and we'll all discuss our different plans on wintertime crappie fishing. And, you know, I kind of look forward to the wintertime, which I deer hunt, but there's nobody fishing.
No, and I look forward to that too. We got some really good lakes in Louisiana. For wintertime fishing, you can go fish. I guide on 8 or 9 different lakes, so we have so many different styles of fishing for the wintertime.
Yeah.
We can go still catch fish in 6 or 8 foot of water, or we can go drop on them at 30 foot deep in different lakes. So a lot of good options there, and for wintertime fishing. And like you said, generally nobody's on the water. It's nice. The weather gets good.
Yeah, I mean, are you finding like big schools of fish? What is your primary, objective when you're going out looking for fish this time of year?
There again, it depends on what lake I'm going to. If I'm going to Lake Bistino, they're going to be on the edge of the channel. They're going to be on big stumps. They'll be shallow.
Yeah.
You'll have a school of black crappie, maybe 50 or 60 of them on a stump. We're going to fish for them with little small baits. We're going to fish, like last week I fished there. We had to end up backing off of them and throwing corks at them. So we'll fish that, and say when the winter really gets going, we'll go to Lake Claiborne. It's a real clear, real deep lake. There'll be schools of crappie 30 foot deep. There'll be 1,000 of them on the top. You can sit over there and you can just catch them as fast as you want. I mean, it's good stuff.
So that, like when you were talking about fishing and you had to back off them and throw a cork, were those fish actually scattering off and leaving, or would they just shut down?
You could, if you got close enough to put a jig pole on them, when you put that jig down there, they would swim up to it and they'd swim off. Take it and back up, because they're only like 4 or 5 foot deep on these tops and these stumps on Lake Bistino. So back up and put a little bit of cork on it, a little bit of jig, and pitch up there to it, say 20 foot off, and the cork will hit the water and go straight under.
See, that's something that I'm really glad you brought up, that I think a lot of people don't understand, because they'll say, man, them fish weren't spooky. They didn't leave. Okay, but on my lake, if they don't bite, it's because you spooked them, but they didn't leave. They just kind of locked down.
Sure.
And I'm like, no, you spooked them. They just didn't spook them off.
Sure.
You changed their attitude. They're
Sure.
kind of like a rabbit or a squirrel that kind of runs the other side of the tree.
That's exactly it. And you always, and with the live scope and all, and having looked at it as much as I have as a guide, when I pull up and I see fish, I can kind of tell what kind of attitude they're in, what mood they're in, if they're going to bite. And especially you put the bait out there a couple of times, if they don't do something, you got to change something. And oftentimes backing off of them, either casting to them or casting a cork to them, something like that's often a good technique to get those fish to bite that were, like you said, you might have spooked or bothered a little bit to where they were out of their feeding mood.
I tell everybody that these fish here are the smart ones. We got to go look for the dumb ones, because if they get educated quick, especially on some of these areas that get fished hard. And
that's one of the things I always tell people. I said, when we pull up on that top or that stump, we're going to catch two of them. We're going to catch the hungry one, and we're going to catch the stupid one.
Right.
And you might as well move right on to the next one after that.
I've got some brush piles that I fish, a couple times a week, and we go there in one target mode is to catch a couple of the dumb ones because it's a lot of smart ones on these tops. They've been fished so hard, throughout the year, and we got to go catch a dumb one and move on to another pile. But they get educated quick from these boats.
They do, and that's one of the things I always do and when I'm guiding is we move a lot. We're constantly moving. People talk about using their spot lock. I never use my spot lock because we're going to catch those two fish, and we're going to go right on to the next thing, and not spend a whole lot of time trying to catch a fish that's not active and not going to bite.
Do you ever go back to those same spots again throughout the day, or
sometimes you can, but say like when I'm at Lake Bistineau or some of these other places, Lake Bistineau's got 1,000 stumps. You just keep going down the line, so there's no reason to turn around and go back. Now, if you find one where you caught a bunch of them, sure, turn around and go back there in a little while, but give it a good time to rest because, I've done that a lot of times before, and it seems like when you go back to it, the fish are, it seems like you still just caught the active ones that we're going to eat.
Yeah.
They still don't, a lot of times, don't get fired back up.
You were talking about, a small jig, and what do you call small in Louisiana?
I tie on my own jigs, my hand-tied crickets, if you will, and I tie a 32nd ounce head and a 16th. That's what I use basically all the time.
So you have crickets?
Well, I call them my hand-tied crickets. But my jigs, especially my small ones, it is a little bitty jig. It has one single feather coming out the back of it.
Yeah.
And it's little, and oftentimes that size jig's what I catch my fish on.
Is there any better colors for that area that, if you're going to the lake, say tomorrow afternoon, and you only had to say 3 different colors of jigs?
I only use 4 colors of jigs anyway.
Oh, well, okay.
That's easy. I use gray. I got a gray with a chartreuse tail. I got a green pumpkin. And I got what we call the Bistineau jig, which is a pink, purple chartreuse jig. And sometimes I will use an orange jig. But I try to keep my colors, besides that one real bright one, I try to keep my colors real natural. And I always feel like that natural presentation is a better way to get more bites.
I know that just from fishing, in some of my lakes, it seems like you kind of touched on that, is those personality of colors on those lakes. And have you seen that same thing?
I've got one lake. You can take a dark green, it's a green pumpkin jig. You can catch every fish in that lake on that jig. You might take all the rest of the colors, and you might catch some of them. It seems like on that lake, they will swim across the screen to eat that sucker.
Both of you guys, and I'm not a real big cork guy now. I need to, but I know Todd's real big about it, and you're big as well, it sounds like to me. Kind of go through that setup on how to actually utilize this technique that we're talking right now.
Well, on the cork fishing, just get a little bit of my history. I didn't, before the live scope came along, my 100% of my crappie fishing was done out of a 14-foot John boat with a paddle in one hand and a jig pole in the other. So oftentimes, the cork technique, it was something I did every day because sometimes that's just how they wanted it. I think when you throw it out there with a cork, you take all your movement of your hands out of it, and that bait sits down there, sits real, real still. And oftentimes I think that's what it takes. So my cork setup when I'm fishing something like that is just a little small cork. Put your jig higher, you can look on live scope and see how far above that stump you need to put your jig, and that's what I fish a lot of times. And sometimes, like last year on Lake Darbone for the Crappie Masters, and the fish were real, real spooky, we took a slip cork. You set fish out there on the live scope, he's 12 foot down that tree. I'm measuring out my slip cork and throw it up there by the tree and stay 20 foot off of them and catch them like that. So, it's just, I guess it's stuff I knew from when I was younger and techniques I used before live scope, and I just married all those techniques to the new technology and the live scope and made those work.
I think it's very underutilized would be the corks, and there sounds like, definitely times that you've used it in tournaments to do well, huh?
Sure. It's just something, it's just another technique. And like I said, it's from my earlier days of fishing ponds, fishing, things I fished on the farm or, some of the local lakes. It's just, just a technique a technique I always used. And whenever live scope came out, I just kind of married because I always fished single pole. I never spider rigged. For live scope, I never even had a depth finder on any boat I owned. So, I never did any of that. I was always a single pole fisherman. So for me to take my techniques and marry them to the live scope technology was super easy.
I grew up fishing below dams. And so you're fishing from the bank.
Yeah.
And you come below Eufaula or Hugo or Sardis or Worcester, or not Sardis, Mississippi, but the one that we've got in Oklahoma, and you get below the dam, the day, like even today, you know, y'all talking about not a lot of people fishing in the winter, but even right now, if any of those places are running water, there will be 100 people below the dam fishing for crappie.
Wow.
And they're all fishing from the bank, but they're fishing as far as they can cast out there 10 to 12 foot deep, finding those eddies. And so that's what I grew up doing, you know, growing up until I got old enough. We didn't have a boat. My dad loved fishing off of the bank, casting a jig and a cork.
I mean, I grew up on a farm. We had 8 or 10 ponds on the farm. Every one of them was full of black crappie. I did the same thing. I mean, I didn't have a boat. We sat on the bank and we throw corks and jigs, and that's just something, you know, grew up doing. It's something I still feel comfortable doing.
And then, you know, once I started guiding, I started thinking, dang, these people are really overworking this bait.
Right.
But if you put a cork on it, they can't move it up and down. They can move it horizontally,
Right.
but they can't sit there and constantly jigging it.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, I say, hey, because they get down there and they start doing that at fish. I'm like, no. I said, just because they call it a jig does not mean you have to do it.
And that's a jig pole. I mean, they.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I tell my clients all the time, all right, I want y'all to stare at the screen for a minute before you do anything, beginning of every trip. So do you see anything on that screen that's moving straight up and down?
That's a good way to put it.
Nope. And I'm like, okay, don't do that with your bait.
All
You
right.
can swim it
Yeah.
horizontally, but don't be going up and down, because it's a very unnatural movement in their world.
That's it. That's it.
And so, you know, that's where the cork, to me, really helps clients, because then once they see that, then they can transfer it over into fishing without the cork and holding the rod a little more stable
Sure.
all the time. And, you know, every lake fish is different. You know, Jerry Hancock down at Fork, he talks about pulling a bait away from fish.
Right.
Coming up, 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 up. Our fish, if you do that 99.9% of the time, they'll follow it halfway up and then they'll go back down. And when they go back down, they disappear.
Yep, I agree. I mean, you hear no argument from me. It's the same way.
But if you start swimming it away from them, even if you're swimming it out of the scope, just start swimming it away, that fish will bite it.
A lot of times. Yeah, or it's just like when you're casting at them, you're swimming it past them. I mean, they'll chase and eat that
Right.
a lot better than they will, like you said, unnatural movements.
Yeah.
Yeah, that terminology, jigging, is miscued or what have you. That
Yeah, and you know, when I learned how to really jig fish, you know, single pole fishing, out of my John boat on Dorcheap Bayou, there was an older gentleman named Reggie Chandler, who's the greatest jig fisherman I've ever seen. The man's 92 years old, still gets out there almost every day in that John boat and goes catch a crappie. But I always watched him, and he always held that sucker dead still. Every now and then he might pop it, but I kind of modeled my way of fishing after his, because he was so good at it. And it was until you had a live scope you understood what the reasoning behind that was, why he was holding it so still, because we all know that fish is going to swim up to it and look at it just like that. And then if you move it, like you said, unnatural movements, they're going to swim off. If you hold it dead still, you're going to catch them. So, you know, it's just one of the things that I was already doing. I didn't know why I was doing it.
Right. You know, it's kind of like I told you years ago, Brad, you know, 27 years of guiding, I did for about 22 of those years. I had people that show up and they'll say, I want you to teach me how to catch them on a jig. I can catch them on a minnow, but I can't catch them on a jig. Same deal. Get out there, and I'm like, all right, here's a stake bed. You know, this is before live scope. I'm like, here's the stake bed. Drop right in there. And they'd go to moving it vertically.
Jigging it.
And I'd say, okay, now show me how you catch them on a minnow. And they hold it dead still and they get bit. And I'm like, all right, I just taught you how to catch them on a jig. Let's go.
It's been an easy day.
Give me my money and let's go.
Yeah.
But it's especially coming up, you know, we're talking about getting into fall and winter, especially this time of the year.
Sure. They're going to get on the feed. They bite really well, but it seems like the bite changes from the summertime bite. Summertime bite's always fast and furious, and you just have to pay attention to your details a little bit more in the winter, and you know, you're still going to catch them.
Yeah. Just slow everything down.
Slow everything down.
one of your, you know, say you put adding split shot to these floats or run through? I know Todd used to use or maybe still use beads and such. How are you tying it up from the beginning to the end?
Oh, if I'm doing a float, just have slip cork. Sure, I'm using the beads and the little piece of yarn up the line to get it to your length or whatever. But if I'm just doing just my regular 4 or 5 foot deep cork, is just one of the little small orange
cigar
and white,
shaped or whatever.
Yeah, orange and white corks, and usually no weight. And usually when I'm doing that, I'm still using that real small 32nd ounce jig. And I think it has a lot to do with the slowness of the fall and everything. But that I think I hate to call it finesse fishing, but it's a finesse fishing. And but I usually don't use a piece of weight above it. I usually just a jig and a cork.
Todd?
It depends. Anything that is less than 7 foot, use a fixed cork.
Yeah, like you said.
Once you get deeper in that, I'll use a slip cork.
Yeah, it's just too much of a pain to try to flip it out there when you got that much extra line.
Right. And with a 9-10 foot rod, you can throw a fixed cork pretty easy.
Yeah.
At that depth. But yeah, I mean, the slip cork deal, we've done podcasts before on it. And it's very underutilized.
It is.
All times of the year, but winter especially.
Sure. And I try not to ever use minnows. I don't use them in my guide service. I don't think they should be in any tournament. But so jig fishing all the time, I don't use the slip cork so much, because when you see that cork, when that little bitty cork, when it just moves a little bit, he's hitting it. So you're setting the hook. And I think with the slip cork and just using the jig, sometimes I'm missing bites by doing that, being that I just use jigs.
Plastics are just always hand tied.
I use some plastics, and but mainly hand ties. But there's some places I go to, they won't bite a hand tie. They want a plastic, and something small, like a little small snacky lure. That's my favorite plastic bait there is right now, and I put that on a little 32nd ounce head. And talking about the heads, I use minnow heads on everything. I'm convinced that when that crappie comes up and looks at that bait, he's looking at nothing but the profile. And the minnow head and the pointed head on it, I think, is what makes the biggest difference when you're trying to jig fish.
Huh, I've never heard that one.
Have you ever seen a minnow with a round head?
Not particularly.
No. So now, and that was one of the things I used before all this came out. For whatever reason, I always liked those minnow heads.
Yeah.
And I caught fish on them. And the creek I live on, it's all blackfish.
Yeah.
They're picky anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So that's something that makes sense to me. It's also, I think, the reason why a lot of people use the hatchet head is because when that fish is looking at it from the bottom, he's looking at nothing but the profile. I don't think it matters what color your head is, if it's got eyeballs on it or anything. It's all about the profile because they're looking at it from the bottom. What
about jig color head? Do you think it makes a difference matching it or unmatching it, or what's your thoughts?
The only one I use my dark green jig I tie, I will powder coat a head for that. But the other two, the gray and chartreuse, I just use a regular lead head. And then the Bissino jig, which is the pink head, purple wrap, chartreuse body, I think that pink head, it does make them fire off sometimes. But I'm not big on everything else I use got lead heads. All my plastics, I don't paint those heads or anything. I just use lead head. I don't think it really matters because, like I said, when I think it really comes down to it, and those fish, they all get up under it. They're looking at a profile more than a color or anything else.
Well, I've definitely talked about this, and I need to utilize these floats a lot more, I know. And I definitely enjoyed finally meeting you, man.
Yeah, man.
I've seen you on Facebook and seen you at different weigh-in lines and such, and it's been a while, and I said, man, I got to get that big guy on there.
Well, I sure do love it, man. That's all I've ever wanted to do in my life is fish, and now I've got to the opportunity where I can do it every day.
Yeah.
And hey, it's nothing but it's living the dream.
That's right. How can somebody find you?
Just find me on Facebook. Either just look up Wesley Miller, or you can look up Big Sasquatch Outdoors. Message me, get with me. We'll make a trip and we'll go catch a bunch of fish.
All right, man. That's all I got today. Hey, comment and tell us your favorite lake and your favorite technique to catch wintertime crappie, maybe. You got anything else, Ty?
I'm good, bro.
All right. Until next time, Brad Chappell here.
Todd Huckabee.
Appreciate it. Nice meeting y'all guys.
You too.
Holla.
From big muddy river, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away.